There's a name in the Bible that almost no one mentions, a son who was born before Isaac, but who seems to have been erased from collective memory. I'm talking about Abraham's first son, Ishmael. His name means God hears, and this was no random choice. Behind this seemingly simple story lies a prophecy that has shaped the fate of entire nations to this day. While everyone knows Isaac as the son of promise, few stop to consider the extraordinary purpose the Creator had for Ishmael. His story isn't about rejection, it's about a God who never abandons anyone. Today, we'll discover together the truth about this forgotten patriarch and how his life reveals something profound about the divine character. Prepare for a journey that ranges from the deserts of the Middle East to the prophecies that still echo in our modern world. And I can guarantee, in the end, you will never look at the forgotten in the same way again. Why are some biblical stories overlooked? Why are certain characters mentioned briefly as if they were mere footnotes in the grand narrative of faith? When we speak of Abraham, our minds go straight to Isaac, the son of promise, born when everything seemed impossible. But before Isaac existed, there was another boy playing in the patriarch's tents, a boy who grew up hearing God's promises, who watched his father build altars, and who was part of this journey of faith from the beginning. This first son lived 13 years as Abraham's only heir, 13 years as the center of attention, as the hope of the lineage. Imagine what that meant for a child, to be the only son of the man who conversed with God. But the story took a different turn, and suddenly the one who was first became second. The one who was the center found himself on the periphery, and so began one of the most complex and moving narratives in all of Scripture. What few realize is that this was no accidental twist. There was a greater purpose unfolding, a divine plot that was just beginning. Ishmael's story begins with a desperate woman and a decision that would change everything. Sarah, Abraham's wife, was tired of waiting. The divine promise of numerous descendants seemed too distant, and she made a decision common in that culture. She offered her servant Hagar to bear a child. It was an accepted practice at the time. When a wife was unable to have children, she could use a servant as a surrogate. Any child born from this union would be legally considered the wife's. It seemed like a perfect solution. But as always happens when we try to expedite divine plans, complications soon arose. Hagar, the Egyptian servant, conceived quickly. And with the pregnancy came something unexpected, a change in the household dynamics. The Bible tells us that Hagar began to despise Sarah. Imagine the tension. The servant who now carried the family's future looking down on the one who couldn't bear children. Sarah reacted harshly. The pressure became so intense that Hagar fled into the desert. Alone, pregnant and without resources, she found herself face to face with death. It was there, beside a spring of water, that something extraordinary happened. An angel of the Lord appeared to her, and the first words she heard were, "Return to your mistress." But then came a promise that would echo through the centuries. "I will multiply your descendants so that they will be too numerous to count." When Ishmael was born, Abraham was 86 years old. 13 long years would pass before Isaac arrived. Throughout this time, Ishmael was the only son, the heir apparent, the one on whom the family's hopes rested. But a question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Was Ishmael truly part of the divine plan, or was it just a human attempt to force the fulfillment of the promise? The answer came in dramatic fashion when Isaac was finally born. Sarah, who had laughed at God's promise, now laughed with joy, but her joy soon turned to jealousy and insecurity. During Isaac's weaning party, she saw Ishmael playing and immediately sensed a threat. "Cast out this servant woman and her son," she said to Abraham, "for this servant woman's son will not inherit with my son Isaac." Harsh words that cut the patriarch's heart like a sharp blade. Abraham faced a cruel dilemma. How could he cast out his own son, the boy he had raised as his heir for over a decade? How could he send away the one who bore his blood and inheritance? The divine response was surprising. Do not let it displease you because of the lad or your maidservant. In all that Sarah says to you, listen to her voice, for through Isaac your offspring will be called." The morning of their separation must have been one of the most painful of Abraham's life. He rose early, prepared bread and a skin of water, and gave them to Hagar. Heartbroken, he said goodbye to Ishmael, knowing he might never see them again. Imagine the scene. A 16-year-old boy walking through the desert with his mother, carrying only enough for a few days. Where would they go? How would they survive? The future was a gigantic question mark on the arid horizon. Before we continue this touching story, please leave a like if you followed along and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any biblical content like this. It's quick, and it helps me a lot to know that you're enjoying the content. Now let's return to the desert where one of the most moving scenes in the Bible was about to unfold. The water ran out. The scorching desert sun sapped their strength. Hagar, seeing her son dying of thirst, placed him under a bush and walked away. She couldn't bear to see Ishmael die before her eyes. It was then that she sat down and began to cry. But it wasn't just the cry of a desperate mother. It was the lament of someone who felt completely abandoned by the world and by God. What Hagar didn't know was that someone was listening. Someone who never forgets the rejected, the outcasts, those who seem to have been left behind. And something was about to happen that would change not only Ishmael's fate, but the course of world history. In the darkest moment, when all seemed lost, a voice pierced the silence of the desert. "What ails you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the young man from where he is." God heard. These two words carry a weight that transcends any translation. The creator of the universe, the one who rules the stars and commands the winds, inclined his ear to hear the cries of a rejected teenager in the middle of nowhere. But the divine message didn't stop there. "Arise, take the lad and hold him by the hand, for I will make him a great nation." A great nation. The same words he had spoken about Isaac were now spoken about Ishmael. The angel showed Hagar a well of water. Life returned where before there had been only imminent death. Ishmael drank, regained his strength, and at that moment his story took a completely new direction. The Bible tells us that God was with the lad, not as a distant or condescending presence, but as a father walking alongside his children. Ishmael grew up in the desert, became an expert archer, and his mother obtained an Egyptian wife for him. There in that arid desert, far from Abraham's tents, far from the promises that seemed to have passed him by, Ishmael discovered something fundamental. He had not been forgotten. He had never been off the divine radar. His name, God Hears, was becoming a literal reality. Ishmael, two simple syllables that contain one of the most profound revelations about God's character. When the angel told Hagar to name her son this, it wasn't a random choice. It was a prophetic declaration that would echo through the millennia. God hears. But what exactly does he hear? He hears the cries of the rejected. He hears the cries of those who have been cast out. He hears the pain of those who feel forgotten by their families, by society, by their own destiny. How often in Scripture do we see God showing special concern for the marginalized? Hagar was the first woman in the Bible to receive a theophany, a direct divine appearance. An Egyptian servant, despised and cast out, was honored with a heavenly visitation that many patriarchs did not experience. The name Ishmael became a constant reminder that there is a God who turns his back on no one. Every time someone spoke his name, they were declaring a fundamental theological truth. Our Creator has attentive ears to the cries of the oppressed. But there is something even deeper in this revelation. The name didn't just describe God's character, it prophesied Ishmael's destiny. He who was heard by God would become the father of multitudes who would also cry out to heaven. And so began to be fulfilled one of the most impressive and least commented on prophecies in the entire Bible. God's promise to Ishmael was neither small nor modest. "I will make him a great nation," were words that carried the weight of an epic destiny. And history has proven that God fulfills his promises even when they seem impossible. Ishmael had 12 sons, who became 12 princes, each leading a powerful tribe. Their names are recorded in Scripture: Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadar, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. 12 lineages that spread throughout the vast regions of the Middle East. These descendants were no insignificant people. They settled from Egypt to Assyria, controlling vital trade routes, dominating strategic territories, and influencing the geopolitics of the entire region. The rejected son became the ancestor of entire nations. The very geography of the ancient world was shaped by Ishmael's descendants. When you read about the Nabateans, the Kedarenes, and the Temanites in later biblical texts, you are encountering Ishmael's children scattered throughout history. But perhaps the most striking aspect is this: while Isaac had only 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, Ishmael had 12. Numerically speaking, his immediate descendants were 6 times greater than those of the son of promise. What does this teach us? That divine plans are always greater and more complex than our limited understanding can grasp. Here we come to one of the most fascinating and least discussed aspects of Ishmael's story: his connection to one of the world's greatest religions today. Islam recognizes Ishmael as a direct ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad, making him a central figure for over 1.5 billion people. According to Islamic tradition, Ishmael was not only blessed by God, but also participated, along with Abraham, in the construction of the Kaaba in Mecca. For Muslims, he is not the forgotten son. He is a fundamental patriarch, a key member of the prophetic lineage. This perspective casts a completely different light on the entire narrative. While many Christians view Ishmael as a secondary figure, a third of humanity considers him one of the pillars of their faith. This is no coincidence. It is the literal fulfillment of the promise that he would become a great nation. The influence of Ishmael's descendants shaped not only geography, but also the spirituality, culture, art, and philosophy of vast regions of the world. From the Arab traders who connected East and West to the scholars who preserved Greek knowledge during the Middle Ages, the mark of Ishmael's children is imprinted on human civilization. And it all began with a rejected teenager, dying of thirst in the desert, whose cry was heard by the God who never forgets anyone. It's incredible how a story of rejection became one of humanity's greatest religious and cultural influences. When we look at Ishmael's story through 21st century eyes, we see something extraordinary. That boy expelled from his home became one of the most influential figures in world history. His descendants shaped entire nations, religions, and cultures. But there's something even deeper to this narrative. Ishmael's story isn't just about him, it's about all of us who have felt rejected, forgotten, and pushed aside. It's about discovering that there is a God who hears our cries, even when it seems the whole world has turned its back on us. How many times have you felt like Ishmael, overlooked by a younger brother, expelled from a place where you thought you belonged? Walking through an emotional desert, unsure if you'll find a source of water. The message of Ishmael's life echoes through the centuries. You have not been forgotten. The God who heard the cries of a teenager in the desert also hears yours. The God who transformed rejection into purpose can also transform your pain into a divine plan. Ishmael died at the age of 137, having seen the fulfillment of divine promises. He witnessed his sons become princes, his tribes establish themselves, his descendants multiply like the stars in the sky. The rejected became patriarch, the forgotten became unforgettable. And perhaps this is the most powerful lesson of all. In God's hands, there is no wasted life. No dream is too small. No person is too insignificant. We have reached the end of this journey, and I hope you have discovered what I discovered by studying Ishmael's life. It reveals something fundamental about the heart of God. The creator of the universe doesn't just care about the children of promise. He doesn't reserve his attention only for the obvious chosen ones, the favorites. those who seem to have been born with a clear purpose. The God of the Bible is the God who listens, and he especially listens to those who feel forgotten. When Hagar wept in the wilderness, he heard. When Ishmael was dying of thirst, he intervened. When it seemed all hope was lost, he appeared with a promise that would turn rejection into eternal purpose. The story of Ishmael reminds us that divine love is not exclusive. It is inclusive. It is not limited. It is abundant. It does not abandon those who have been rejected by men. On the contrary, it makes them instruments of his grand plans. If you identify with Ishmael today, if you've ever felt overlooked, forgotten, as if you weren't the son of promise, know this: your name also means God hears. He is listening to your prayers, your dreams, your silent cries in the desert of life. And just as he transformed a rejected young man into a father of nations, he can transform your story of pain into a testimony of hope, because this is the God of Ishmael, the God who never forgets anyone. The story of Abraham's forgotten son teaches us that there is no chance in God's plans. Ishmael was not a mistake, a deviation, a footnote in the narrative of faith. He was an integral part of a purpose that transcends our human understanding. Today, when you look at someone who seems rejected, remember Ishmael. When you yourself feel forgotten or overlooked, remember the meaning of his name: God hears. And when it seems your dreams have been buried in the desert of circumstances, remember that the same God who brought water from the dry land can bring purpose to your pain. If this story touched your heart, share this video with someone who needs to know that God also hears them. Leave a comment telling us how you relate to Ishmael's story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can discover more treasures hidden in the pages of the Bible together. Because just as Ishmael discovered that God listens, you too can discover that you were never alone on this journey. Your story of apparent rejection may actually be the beginning of a purpose that will impact generations. May the God of Ishmael, the God who hears, who sees, who never forgets, be your God today too.